The room hums before anyone speaks. Cameras blink like watchful eyes. Aides lean forward, and the air feels electrically charged, as if everyone senses a line is about to be crossed. Then it happens. In a calm, measured tone, Jasmine Crockett references a claim already ricocheting across headlines, a whispered question about Ivanka and Jared's marriage that has been circulating in public discourse for weeks. She doesn't shout it. She doesn't dramatize it. She simply places it on the table, and the silence that follows is louder than any gavel. For a split second, time freezes. You can almost hear producers holding their breath, wondering if this is really happening. Live, this is the kind of moment politics pretends doesn't exist. The moment when power feels exposed and narrative control slips. And then, right on cue, Trump loses it. His posture stiffens, his voice sharpens, and the mask of command cracks just enough for the cameras to catch it. The reaction is immediate, visceral, and impossible to ignore. What was supposed to be another predictable exchange suddenly turns volatile. Crockett sits steady, eyes forward, as if she knew exactly what this single line would unleash. Around them, the room buzzes with murmurs, side glances, and the unmistakable sense that something has shifted. This isn't just about a family rumor or a sensational headline. It's about who gets to define truth, who gets to dodge scrutiny, and who is finally willing to say out loud what others only whisper. Viewers at home feel it instantly. Phones are already being grabbed. Clips are already being imagined. Because moments like this don't just inform, they ignite. They tap into a deeper frustration, a hunger to see power challenged without fear. And as Trump's voice rises and the tension spikes, one thing becomes clear. This conversation is no longer under his control. The question hanging in the air isn't whether this claim is comfortable or convenient. It's whether anyone in that room is prepared for what comes next. Because once a line like that is crossed, there's no walking it back, only forward, straight into the fire. No one interrupts. No one laughs it off. The cameras keep rolling, and the audience senses history tilting. This is the instant before escalation, when restraint meets provocation. And every instinct screams that the next exchange will define winners, losers, and the story everyone will remember forever. When moments like this erupt, they don't live in isolation. They tap into something larger, something Americans recognize instantly, the collision of power and accountability. This isn't just a tense exchange between two public figures. It's a stress test of the system itself, asking whether privilege still shields the powerful from the questions everyone else is forced to answer. For years, politics has operated on an unspoken hierarchy. Some names carry weight, some families move untouched through controversy, and some truths are quietly redirected before they can land. That's why this moment lands so hard. A sitting lawmaker calmly references what many have already seen hinted at in headlines and online debates, and suddenly the usual guardrails vanish. The reaction tells the story. When scrutiny is unfamiliar, even the suggestion of it feels like an attack. This is where American values come into focus. Transparency isn't supposed to be selective. Ethics aren't meant to apply only to the powerless. And accountability, at its core, is about answering questions without rage, without threats, without trying to drown out the conversation. Yet, here we are, watching a familiar pattern play out in real time. Deflection instead of explanation. Volume instead of clarity. For viewers who've watched institutions fail them, this moment resonates deeply. Immigrants who've had to justify their existence. Working families questioned for every step they take. Communities told to be grateful, quiet, and patient. They know this dynamic well. They know what it looks like when power bristles at even the lightest challenge. And they know how rare it is to see someone refuse to back down. The stakes rise, because this isn't about gossip. It's about whether public figures connected to immense influence can ever be discussed honestly. It's about whether proximity to power still guarantees silence from everyone else in the room. Crockett's composure contrasts sharply with the explosion it provokes. And that contrast forces a question no one can avoid. If this topic is so insignificant, why does it trigger such fury? Across the country, people are watching with a growing sense that this exchange represents something overdue. A reckoning with double standards. A demand that the rules apply evenly, regardless of last names or political clout. The tension isn't just personal. It's cultural. It's about whose stories get protected and whose get picked apart. And as the voices rise and the cameras refuse to cut away, a realization settles in. This moment isn't fading. It's accelerating. What happens next reshapes the narrative. Not just for the people in the room, but for everyone who's ever wondered whether accountability still means anything at all. The fallout is just beginning. In that sense, the exchange becomes a mirror held up to the nation. It reflects frustration, hope, and a hunger for fairness that refuses to disappear. Every raised eyebrow and clipped response reinforces how fragile authority becomes when questioned calmly and publicly. People sense that lines once considered untouchable are being tested, and that alone changes the atmosphere. The room no longer belongs to tradition or intimidation, but to scrutiny itself. With each passing second, the weight of expectation grows heavier. Viewers lean in, not because they crave spectacle, but because they recognize a turning point. This is the sound of old rules colliding with new demands, of silence giving way to insistence. And as the tension stretches tighter, it's clear. The next exchange won't just respond to the moment, it will define it. Everyone can feel it now. The sense that composure or collapse will determine who commands the story when the next words arrive for good. Trump's public persona has been built on dominance, the projection of strength so loud it drowns out doubt. From the earliest days of his rise, he learned that controlling the narrative mattered more than correcting it. When challenged, he didn't retreat, he advanced. He reframed criticism as persecution, questions as disrespect, and scrutiny as betrayal. That instinct became muscle memory. Cameras weren't observers, they were weapons. Volume replaced vulnerability. Confidence substituted for clarity. For supporters, it felt like power. For critics, it felt like intimidation. Either way, the effect was the same. Attention bent toward him, and the story followed. Over time, this approach hardened into reflex. Every investigation became a witch hunt. Every critic was labeled biased, corrupt, or weak. The strategy worked because it simplified reality into loyalty tests. You were either with him or against him. Complexity disappeared. Accountability blurred. By turning every challenge into a personal attack, Trump shifted focus away from substance and toward spectacle. Outrage consumed oxygen. Supporters rallied defensively. Opponents reacted predictably. The cycle fed itself, reinforcing the belief that denial was not just effective, but righteous, even necessary, to survive a hostile world. Where doubt threatened authority and silence felt like safety, control of narrative became his shield. Press conferences turned into performances. Social media became a megaphone that bypassed filters and fact-checking. If a story hurt him, he attacked the source. If facts contradicted him, he questioned motives. This pattern wasn't random, it was disciplined. By staying perpetually on offense, he avoided the vulnerability of explanation. Anger kept him centered. Conflict kept him relevant. And as long as he dominated the frame, consequences felt distant, abstract, something that happened to other people, never to him, until moments arrived that refused control and demanded answers in public view without escape routes. Historically, scrutiny triggered escalation. A raised question invited a raised voice. A quiet fact-check sparked a loud counterpunch. Trump's power depended on imbalance, on making opponents react emotionally, while he framed himself as the aggrieved fighter. It worked best when challengers flinched or softened. When they hesitated, he surged. But the model had a weakness. It required fear, it required deference, and when confronted by calm persistence instead of retreat, the machinery strained, grinding louder, less precise, revealing effort where dominance once appeared effortless. That vulnerability lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the wrong moment to expose itself fully. That moment now looms. Because what unsettles Trump most isn't accusation, it's composure. Not noise, but steadiness. The kind that refuses to be baited. Jasmine Crockett doesn't mirror his volume or match his fury. She challenges him by remaining still, by letting questions breathe. That inversion threatens everything his persona relies on. Without chaos to command, his reactions stand alone, stripped of justification. The contrast sharpens. Control begins to slip. And for the first time, the story feels less like something he directs and more like something closing in around him. With consequences he can no longer redirect or dismiss. This backstory matters because it explains the reaction unfolding on screen. The outburst isn't spontaneous, it's conditioned. Years of unchecked dominance collide with a challenge that won't yield. The familiar tools still deploy, but their effect weakens. Each interruption feels sharper, each denial rings thinner. The audience senses the shift before it's acknowledged. When control becomes effort instead of instinct, cracks show. And in those cracks, a new possibility emerges. That the narrative might finally move beyond him. Shaped by someone unwilling to be intimidated or erased, setting the stage for a confrontation that changes everything permanently, starting right now, tonight. As the tension thickens, his past strategies echo loudly in the room. The raised voice, the sharp deflection, the instinct to dominate rather than answer. But repetition exposes weakness. What once overwhelmed now invites scrutiny. Crockett's presence reframes the exchange, turning bluster into evidence of discomfort. The cameras don't flinch. Neither does she. And the more he reaches for control, the more visible its absence becomes. This is the danger for anyone who builds power on intimidation alone. The moment someone stands firm, the spell begins to break, and the audience feels the balance quietly shifting in real time together. That shift is why this moment feels different. Trump's history shows mastery over chaos, but not over calm resistance. The familiar playbook meets an unfamiliar response, and the imbalance grows obvious. His grip on the story weakens as the exchange continues, and the audience senses a turning point approaching. Not a collapse, but an exposure, the kind that doesn't shout, but lingers. As the room waits for the next words, the question isn't whether he will respond, it's whether his response will deepen the unraveling that has already begun, and pull everyone toward consequences no amount of anger can stop. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive in this room by accident, and she did not arrive unprepared. Her presence is the product of years spent learning how power operates, how it evades responsibility, and how it reacts when challenged by someone it cannot easily dismiss. Long before the cameras turned toward her, she was studying systems that quietly decide who is heard and who is ignored. Law was not a career choice for her, it was a tool, a way to translate frustration into structure and outrage into action. Her rise was shaped by advocacy, by standing alongside people who were constantly asked to explain themselves simply for existing. Immigrants navigating hostile systems. Communities treated as problems instead of people. Families forced to prove their worth over and over again. Crockett learned early that justice is rarely handed down gently. It has to be demanded, with precision. That discipline shows now in her posture, in the way she waits, in the way she speaks, only when the moment requires it. Unlike those who mistake volume for authority, Crockett understands the power of restraint. Her legal training taught her that credibility is built through preparation, not performance. Every argument has a foundation. Every claim must withstand scrutiny. That grounding gives her an advantage in rooms like this one. She doesn't need to dominate the air. She knows the weight of her words will do that for her. When she speaks, it's not to provoke, but to expose what already exists beneath the surface. There is also something deeply personal in the way she carries herself. She represents people who have been talked over, mischaracterized, or erased from national conversations. People who have watched others debate their lives as abstract concepts. Crockett brings those experiences with her, not as bitterness, but as clarity. She understands what it feels like to be underestimated, and she knows how dangerous that assumption can be for those who make it. That is why her calm is so disarming. It is not passivity. It is confidence, earned through experience. She has faced hostile rooms before, rooms where skepticism was thicker than respect. She learned how to hold her ground without flinching, how to let silence work, how to allow others to reveal themselves through reaction. That skill is rare, especially in political spaces addicted to spectacle. It allows her to apply pressure without raising her voice, to ask questions that cannot be laughed away. Empathy is central to her story, but so is resolve. Crockett's background in law sharpened her sense of timing. She knows when to push and when to pause. She knows that credibility comes from consistency, from showing up prepared every time, even when the odds feel stacked. That preparation radiates now, signaling to viewers that this moment was anticipated, that she understood exactly what invoking those headlines would trigger. For audiences who have rarely seen themselves reflected in power, her presence feels validating. She doesn't apologize for belonging in the room. She doesn't soften her point to spare fragile egos. She stands as proof that intellect and integrity can coexist with courage. That combination builds anticipation because it suggests this: confrontation will not dissolve into chaos. It will sharpen, it will clarify. Crockett's rise also challenges an old narrative about who gets to question authority. She does not fit the image of someone expected to unsettle figures like Trump, and that expectation works in her favor. Each composed response subverts assumptions. Each measured line widens the gap between reaction and control. The audience senses that she is not improvising. She is executing. This backstory matters because it explains why she does not retreat now. She has spent years preparing for moments when power resists accountability. She knows the playbook. She has seen intimidation masquerade as strength. And she has learned that the most effective response is not fear, but steadiness. That knowledge gives her an edge as the tension builds, as the room waits for the next exchange. Viewers lean forward with her. They recognize something familiar. In her journey, the quiet determination to be taken seriously, to refuse erasure, to demand fairness without begging for it. Crockett embodies that resolve. And as the pressure mounts, it becomes clear that her calm is not the absence of conflict. It is the prelude to it. The question now is not whether she can withstand what comes next, but whether anyone else in the room is ready for the clarity she is about to bring. The temperature in the room shifts almost imperceptibly at first, like a storm rolling in before anyone names it. Trump leans forward, fingers drumming, jaw tightening, eyes narrowing as Jasmine Crockett continues without rushing a single word. He cuts in, sharp and loud, trying to reclaim the rhythm. She pauses just long enough to let the interruption hang, then resumes exactly where she left off, steady as if nothing happened. That calm lands harder than any insult. Trump interrupts again, louder this time. He waves a hand, scoffs, mutters under his breath. Each attempt to derail her only sharpens the contrast. His voice raises, her tone stays level, his shoulders tense. Hers remains square. Viewers can feel it before they consciously understand it. Something is slipping. He deflects, jumping sideways to familiar talking points, hoping noise will replace substance. The words come fast, but they land flat. Jasmine doesn't chase him. She lets the detour exhaust itself, then gently pulls the conversation back, like a seasoned attorney guiding a witness who wants to run. The audience senses the shift, the way a room does when confidence drains from one side and quietly pools around the other. Trump laughs, a short, brittle sound, and tries to frame it as a joke. It doesn't work. The laughter feels forced, defensive. His eyes flick around, searching for validation, for someone else to jump in and change the subject. Jasmine watches him closely, not with anger, but with focus. She knows she has time. He doesn't. Another interruption, another raised voice. Each one lands weaker than the last. The pattern is familiar to anyone who's seen power confronted by preparation. When he can't dominate the pace, he tries to overwhelm it. When that fails, frustration bleeds through. His face reddens, his sentences lose their clean edges. He starts answering questions no one asked. Jasmine adjusts her posture, leaning in just slightly. It's subtle, but it signals control. She acknowledges his point with a single sentence, then pivots back to the core issue. No theatrics, no insults, just clarity. That restraint amplifies the tension. The audience can feel their own shoulders tighten, waiting for the moment when restraint meets exposure. Trump's interruptions begin to backfire. Each cut in highlights what he's avoiding. Each raised voice draws attention to what he doesn't want discussed. He tries to speak over her again, but the room doesn't follow him this time. The momentum has shifted. Even his allies sense it, the way silence starts to gather where noise used to work. There's a flicker of irritation that crosses his face, quickly replaced by bravado. He leans back, arms crossed, signaling dismissal. Jasmine doesn't react. She continues, voice even, eyes forward, laying the groundwork piece by piece. It's methodical, deliberate, almost surgical. The calm becomes its own kind of pressure. Viewers at home feel the anticipation rise, that electric moment before something breaks open. Trump interrupts once more, sharper than before, but the effect is gone. The contrast is complete now. Agitation versus composure, bluster versus precision. The power dynamic has flipped, and everyone knows it. Jasmine pauses, just for a breath, long enough for the room to settle, long enough for Trump to realize he no longer controls the exchange. And then she looks up, ready to say the words he couldn't control. Jasmine doesn't rush it. She lets the pause stretch just long enough to feel intentional, long enough for the tension to settle into every corner of the room. When she speaks again, her voice is measured, almost conversational, and that's what makes it land. She doesn't accuse, she connects. She starts with what everyone already knows, then gently walks them toward what they've been trained not to question. She begins with the marriage itself, framed not as romance, but as proximity. A union that didn't just bind to people, she says, but collapsed the distance between family, power, and access. She reminds the room that this wasn't a private relationship tucked away from public life. It was brought directly into the center of government, given offices, authority, and influence. Each sentence is simple. Each one builds on the last dot. Trump shifts in his seat. He opens his mouth to interrupt, then closes it, sensing that cutting her off now would only spotlight what's coming. Jasmine continues, outlining how titles followed the marriage, how responsibilities appeared without elections, how decision-making power flowed through personal ties rather than public accountability. She speaks slowly, deliberately, as if laying out evidence for a jury that's already leaning forward. She pauses again, just briefly, and the silence sharpens. Then she widens the frame. Marriage, she explains, was the doorway. Money was the current that moved through it. She references publicly reported deals, global meetings, and the way access to the highest levels of American power suddenly aligned with private interests abroad. She doesn't dramatize it. She doesn't need to. The accumulation does the work. Trump interjects, louder now, calling it ridiculous, fake, an attack. His voice cracks slightly on the last word. Jasmine doesn't respond immediately. She lets him finish, lets the interruption burn itself out. When she resumes, she does so without raising her voice, without changing her posture, as if the outburst never happened. The contrast is jarring. She explains that the concern isn't love or loyalty, it's leverage. When marriage intersects with governance, when family becomes infrastructure, the lines blur in ways democracy was never designed to handle. Her words land carefully, avoiding sensationalism, sticking to principle. She names the discomfort directly, acknowledging that people are taught not to question powerful families. That's exactly why the question matters. Trump's composure starts to fray. He leans forward again, pointing, shaking his head, trying to reassert dominance. The interruptions come faster now, overlapping her sentences, but they no longer derail. Each attempt only underscores his agitation. Jasmine waits him out, then continues, stacking fact upon fact, connection upon connection. She describes how access begets opportunity, how opportunity attracts money, and how money seeks influence. None of it is framed as secret. It's all been visible, she says, hiding in plain sight, normalized through repetition and defended through outrage. The marriage becomes the thread that ties it together, the symbol of how personal relationships can quietly reshape public power. Another pause. This one, longer. Trump looks around, searching for an exit, for a friendly voice, for anything to interrupt the momentum. He laughs again, louder, sharper, but it rings hollow. Jasmine meets his eyes briefly, not challengingly, but firmly, then looks back forward and delivers the line that makes the room inhale. She says this is what unchecked privilege looks like. Not in a single decision, but in a system that assumes access is earned when it's inherited. That frames proximity as qualification. She reminds the room that millions of Americans are told to wait their turn, to follow the rules, to prove themselves endlessly, while others are ushered through doors simply because of who they married. Trump explodes. He talks over her, voice raised, words tumbling into each other. He accuses her of disrespect, of obsession, of attacking his family. The anger is raw now, unfiltered, but it's too late. The control is gone. The more he shouts, the more the contrast solidifies. Calm versus chaos. Precision versus panic. Jasmine lets him speak. That, more than anything, unravels him. When he finally stops, breathing hard, she responds softly, saying this isn't personal, it's structural. It's about whether democracy bends to families or stands on principles. The sentence is quiet, but it echoes. She methodically addresses the instinct to dismiss these concerns as jealousy or politics, explaining how that reflex itself is part of the shield. When scrutiny is reframed as bitterness, accountability never arrives. She speaks about immigrants, working families, and first-generation Americans who are told that success requires sacrifice, patience, and obedience to the process. The contrast hangs heavy in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. She doesn't need to name every headline. She alludes to them, trusting the audience to remember. The private meetings that suddenly carried public consequences, the financial trajectories it shifted after access expanded, the revolving door between family, office, and influence. Each reference tightens the thread, weaving a picture that feels comprehensive without ever feeling reckless. Trump tries again to seize control, his voice sharp, accusing her of turning a marriage into a weapon. Jasmine responds by clarifying that transparency is not an attack, it's a safeguard. She reminds the room that democracy depends on sunlight, especially where power clusters around bloodlines and bonds. Her words are careful, grounded, and devastating precisely because they refuse to sensationalize. As she speaks, the room seems to shrink. Listeners lean in. The air feels dense. This isn't a viral quip or a one-liner. It's a dismantling, slow and deliberate, forcing everyone to sit with the implications. Trump's posture slumps for just a moment, a crack in the armor, before he straightens again. Too late to undo what's been said. The realization settles that this exchange will be replayed, dissected, and remembered long after the shouting fades, altering narratives no one can fully control. She closes by returning to the marriage, not as scandal, but as symbol. A reminder that power, when insulated from scrutiny, will always protect itself first. The room is silent. Trump sits back, jaw clenched, eyes burning, knowing the moment has slipped beyond his control. And even as the cameras keep rolling, it's clear the impact won't stay contained, because the fallout didn't end in that room. By the time the gavel moves on, the clip is already everywhere. Phones light up, timelines refresh, and a single exchange fractures into thousands of angles, captions, and reaction faces. A hashtag forms within minutes, then another, each one carrying a different emotion but pointing to the same moment. Short clips loop endlessly, the pause before her words, the flash of anger after, the silence that followed. Viewers don't need context to feel it, they feel the shift. Creators race to upload reactions, some stunned, some exhilarated, some defensive. Side-by-side screens replay the interruption, the composure, the unraveling. Comment sections fill faster than anyone can read them. Immigrants recognize the familiar imbalance of power being named. First-generation kids share the clip with a single line. This is what we mean. The moment becomes shorthand for a larger conversation people have been waiting to have. Cable panels scramble. Some hosts praise the clarity and restraint, calling it overdue accountability. Others rush to minimize, insisting it was overblown, out of bounds, inappropriate. The split is immediate and revealing. Praise sounds measured. Denial sounds panicked. The louder the dismissal, the more the clip spreads, feeding the very attention it's meant to suppress. Trump allies flood the zone with spin. Statements drop, almost simultaneously, all echoing the same phrases, all trying to reframe exposure as attack. They accuse, deflect, and scold, demanding respect while offering none. The coordination is obvious. So is the fear. Each response confirms that the point landed closer to the mark than they want to admit. Memes follow, sharp and relentless. The pause becomes a gif. The interruption becomes a punchline. Humor does what outrage alone can't, carrying critique into spaces that would otherwise tune it out. Screenshots circulate with timestamps, freezing the exact second control slips. The internet does what it does best, compressing a complex moment into something unmistakable and impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, supporters of Jasmine Crockett clip her calmest lines, sharing them without commentary, letting the contrast speak. Educators, advocates, and organizers repost with reflections about power, proximity, and accountability. The conversation widens beyond the original confrontation, touching housing, wealth, immigration, and who gets access without asking. The moment stops belonging to any one person. What becomes clear is that this wasn't just viral. It was clarifying. People aren't arguing about what was said as much as why it hit so hard. The outrage isn't manufactured, it's recognition. For many, it's the first time they've seen that recognition reflected back from a position of authority. By nightfall, the narrative has shifted. This isn't a fleeting clip, it's a reference point. Commentators invoke it as shorthand, activists cite it in speeches. Opponents try to move on, but the moment follows them. Resurfacing, whenever power insists on immunity, and as the noise swells as takes collide and timelines blur, something quieter settles underneath it all. A realization that the exposure struck a nerve because it named a truth people have lived with for years, waiting for someone to say it out loud. It forces audiences to confront comfort, complicity, and courage, asking whether democracy survives on outrage alone or on the willingness to interrogate power when it feels untouchable to everyone watching. And beneath the noise, a deeper truth emerged. In the quiet after the storm, the lesson becomes unmistakable. Power, especially the kind that shields itself behind wealth and family ties, resists sunlight. It recoils from scrutiny, reacts with anger, and tries to rewrite narratives to protect the image of But truth.com and deliberate does not follow the same rules. It waits patiently, gains momentum quietly, and when the moment arrives, it cannot be ignored. Jasmine Crockett's words were not an attack. They were illumination. They were the room in the country that accountability is not optional, and that integrity is not negotiable. Jasmine reframed the confrontation in a way that few could ignore. She never raised her voice, never resorted to theatrics. Her precision made the exposure sharper, her composure made the contrast undeniable. She demonstrated that strength is not measured in volume or dominance, but in clarity, consistency, and the courage to name what others avoid. By addressing the marriage, the access, and the influence, she turned what could have been personal theatrics into a universal lesson about the structures that govern privilege and the responsibilities that come with it. The audience, both in the room and watching across screens, understood something fundamental. Those who rely on power without accountability will always falter when confronted with reason and restraint. The chaos of rage is loud, but it is fleeting. Calm truth outlasts it, reverberates beyond a single moment, and leaves an imprint that cannot be erased. Jasmine's measured exposition became more than a rebuttal. It became a blueprint for how courage and principle operate in spaces dominated by fear, intimidation, and entitlement. For immigrants, first-generation Americans, and anyone whose path to opportunity required persistence and patience. The moment was vindication. It validated the belief that merit, preparation, and integrity are real forms of power, forms that endure far longer than inherited privilege. It reminded viewers that the systems built to protect the already powerful can be challenged without losing dignity, and that those who confront imbalance with clarity and evidence do more than win arguments. They shift narratives. Jasmine's handling of the confrontation reframed the cultural expectation that power dictates outcomes. Instead, it showed that accountability and moral courage redefine what is possible in the public arena. The moral of the story is clear. No matter how fortified a structure of influence seems, transparency, reason, and patience will always find the cracks. And those cracks, once illuminated, grow until the light is undeniable. Her calm, relentless articulation became a mirror, reflecting not only the flaws of unchecked palate, but also the capacity for ordinary courage to ignite extraordinary consequences. The confrontation left more than embarrassment in its wake. Left inspiration. It reminded viewers that courage is quiet but potent, that clarity is persuasive, and that dignity, when wielded deliberately, carries a weight heavier than bluster. People watching could sense that this was not the end of the story, but a turning point, a moment when the rules of engagement shifted, when accountability was no longer optional, and when the triumph of reason over rage became tangible. In the end, it wasn't just about one marriage, one family, or one outburst. It was about principle prevailing over privilege, preparation prevailing over posturing, and courage prevailing over fear. The confrontation became a symbolic testament to what happens when power is challenged not with anger, but with reason, not with insults, but with evidence, not with volume, but with integrity. And as the echoes of that moment settled across timelines, screens, and conversations, the lesson was unmistakable. Calm truth, delivered with precision and purpose, outlasts rage, and dignity outlives arrogance. Which brings us back to the question everyone's asking: the moment we witnessed wasn't just another headline? It was a reckoning, a vivid illustration of what happens when unchecked power meets preparation, principle, and courage. Trump's meltdown, the scramble, the viral shockwaves, all of it underscores a simple truth. Accountability cannot be silenced, and dignity will always outlast rage. Jasmine Crockett didn't just call out privilege. She reminded the world that reason, clarity, and integrity carry weight far beyond any title or connection. This is more than politics. It's a lesson for every person who has felt overshadowed, overlooked, or underestimated. It's proof that courage is not loud, that preparation beats posturing, and that speaking truth to power creates ripples that can't be contained. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see that clarity and courage matter. Comment below with your thoughts on what accountability looks like in your own life. And subscribe, because these moments of reckoning, these shifts in power and perspective, are the stories that inspire change and remind us all that we have the strength to confront what feels impossible. The world is watching, and your voice matters.